And I think, Chris, you make a good point. As it continues to go on, consumers are going to change their expectations. Those standards are going to be lifted, and so on and so forth. So fingers crossed.
I'd just like to throw in one more company that I think, obviously not on the AAA kind of level that we're speaking as with Sony, but that has had a massive positive impact this year, has been Niantic. They've had some really outstanding social impact campaigns across all of their titles this year, and they, for me, have been sort of the landmark of how to do things right, at least from the outside perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. See, I did not know that, and I appreciate that. I'm definitely going to look into that further as well, because, yeah, I mean, who doesn't love AR games? Now, I do want to kind of pivot in a different direction about basically talking about kind of the end of the summer and, social games. We talked about the hype surrounding Fall Guys and Among Us and how, the social party games really kind of reached, I would say, a broader market than expected in a lot of ways. So, what have been, I guess, for everybody, your experiences with, kind of the social games during this time of quarantining?
Well, I guess since I mentioned Among Us at the very beginning as sort of one of my game of the years, I'll give it a shot. For me, it's definitely been, or social games overall have had a massive impact on my Steam library this year. Among Us has been up there. Fall Guys has been up there. I've played a little bit of Phasmophobia for quite some time. Been keeping an eye out for what's next. But especially in these difficult times where, depending on where you are in the world, but mostly globally, you weren't really able to meet with each other and hang out, and birthday parties and now the holidays and New Year's all went by, are going to go by without real human interaction outside of your household. So having this as another avenue of just engaging with friends and maybe having sort of your weekly catch up in Among Us or the tabletop simulator, which has been huge for me this year, has been very, very satisfying and just a very impactful social experience for me, keeping close contact with my friends and sometimes even pushing me to having more contact with them than I would in a regular work week. And I'm hoping, and I'm quite confident in saying that this will continue further in the future, no matter with or hopefully without COVID happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not. It's funny because before this year, I actually was not very much a person. I play single player games. Like for me, gaming was always a way for me to unwind kind of just on my own. While, occasionally I would play a multiplayer game, that was not my prerogative and I didn't really find a lot of interest in them. And so it's been really interesting to see even just in my own playing habits that evolve. Like it started with Animal Crossing. But yeah, with Among Us and Fall Guys and Phasmophobia and Dead by Daylight, I actually got into Dead by Daylight this year where now, again, just as Chris was saying, because of COVID, because of the lack of being able to hang out with folks kind of in sort of the real world, just so to speak, finding ways to just interact and be close to people in games has been an adventure this year. And I think it's been really exciting to see the ways that indie games in particular are kind of leading the charge and exploring how social games can work. I think what's been really exciting, kind of going back to that wholesomeness that I love to talk about, things like Fall Guys, for example, where you're competing, but you're not necessarily having to shoot things. Among Us, I mean, I guess you are doing a murder, but for the most part, that game still involves other mechanics other than simply sort of going 100v1 or sort of the social games I think that we typically or previously would think of. And so what's exciting is finding ways that people are able to play socially together that involves other play styles, that's inviting more people to play online and with groups, I think is really cool.
Yes, that is so well said. I have to be honest. I'm much like you, Jenny. I prefer when I'm playing games. Typically, I like to play single player games. Like I love sprawling RPG campaigns, and I think the
Mm-hmm.
sole exception to that, like I cannot play a competitive shooter to save my life. I'm not there. I can't do it. But I absolutely adore party games. Like Mario Party, every time, like I'm there. Even if I don't like it, I'm like, oh man, this is the best experience I've ever had. Because like I think that they're just so fun and dynamic, and I think half the charm of social games is that the quality of your experience is often influenced by who you're playing with, which is not to in any way discredit the quality of games like Fall Guys and Among Us. Like I still pretty regularly am logging hours into Fall Guys, and I think like their whole Wipeout style format is such an original and unique idea. Presenting it as like a TV show that gels with me as like a Total Drama Island fan in just the right way. but yes, but I couldn't agree more. I think like it just encourages us to think differently about like not only the mechanics of the game, but how the quality of a game can be influenced by people, and asking of people to kind of challenge their own inner group dynamics and things like that.
Yeah, I have to second that all too, because for like I agree with both of you, Jenny and Mustafa, because I'm too very into just single player games. But I go back to kind of what I said before, even though it was a different context, that we are a gaming culture, a world gaming culture, and having these new introductions and these rise, especially from the indie scene, but other areas as well too, with more social games, it's really important because like you have more popular games like Fortnite, for example, and well, those are in a way are definitely social games too, but the introduction of different game types and everything else, and if we already know that we're already so immersed as like this world gaming culture, these other introductions are absolutely essential and need to happen, and it's great to see these rise of these types of social games, because if they don't, basically it's called, I'm looking at it from a community perspective, right? Because if everybody with these different approaches with styles of games and the mechanics and everything else, and more of that kind of what we were saying, like wholesome basis, it's really going to help shape and mold what our like essentially world gaming community is going to look like. So it's for me, it's very exciting to see this, because I know this is, or I just honestly feel that this is really what's going to shape everybody's outlook, possibly their personality, behavior, and all these other factors. And it's, from what I can tell, it's moving in the right direction for all those things to happen.
Yeah, I wanted to also kind of chime in there because I remember, back when Nintendo released the Wii, and there were these conversations for like years after that about, oh my god, my grandmother never would have picked up a video game.
Yeah.
Now she plays Wii bowling every day.
Mm-hmm.
True story. It's like just thinking about, like, I have a close friend personally who I think to ask them to play a video game would have been like next to impossible before introducing Among Us into kind of the social circle.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'll have people who like from all different types of social circles from previous jobs and things like that, just being like, hey, when are we playing Among Us? And I'm like, I'm in the Twilight Zone right now, but whenever. So that mass appeal definitely works wonders. And, it even though it's not great to have been forced into a situation where we had to find unique ways to socialize, I guess it is kind of a heartwarming feeling to know that, some of the solutions were kind of in this space that we're also familiar with.
And one thing that's really cool, most specifically about Among Us, that I think has made it so accessible, because my family is in a similar situation where I have a couple family members that have never really ever played games, but they heard about Among Us, and they don't have like computers really, but you can play on phone, on mobile. Mm-hmm. And I think the ability for just as the industry as a whole is also exploring like ways to use mobile and actually start to accept mobile has been really, really neat, and has increase that accessibility, especially right now for folks who are trying to dive into games, especially these social games. And that's been really neat to see too.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree.
Definitely.
Just because we are kind of getting close to time here, I think I want to skip kind of our last little section here and just kind of move into closing, kind of wrapping up. So I really appreciate everything that both of you, Chris and Jenny, and you, Andrew, as well, have contributed to our discussion here. And to kind of close out, in light of all the experiences we have, can everybody kind of take a soapboxy, cheesy moment to summarize what is, really special or different to you about indie games as a whole? And if you could contextualize it within this year, certainly, but you don't have to. Really, just in general.
I think for me, and I think maybe it was brought up a little bit earlier, but just as for indies as a whole, I think what's really special is their ability to tell specific stories. I think that is what really draws me to indies personally, and I think a lot of people feel that. I think that's why when you hear people talk about indies, a lot of times you talk about the heart, the passion, those like more indescribable feelings, but it's the kind of it when you feel it sort of thing. And I think it's because the ways indies are able to not have to necessarily answer to the budgets that AAA games do. And the investors that AAA games do sometimes, and they're able to tell the stories that the developers really seek to tell. I think that goes across not just 2020, but just indies as a whole for me.
Yeah, I have to agree with Jenny here. It's the independent games industry oftentimes is in a position where we are able to take risks that AAA, just due to the nature of business and the investors and their boards that they have to address to, are just not capable to or don't want to take the risk, just because there's too much at stake, I think is the right term here. Obviously, at the same time, independent games, everyone has their own little definition of what that really means. I've seen Tencent recently in 2020, to make this a little bit about current developments, create their own or announce their own indie studio, which has released, I think, 2 or 3 titles this year and are about 300 or 400 people. Now, that's not really independent for me anymore, but that's also a little bit the beauty of independent games. Most of the people, it feels like, separate these days between AAA and indie, and then sort of in between there's the AA, III field, or whatever you might want to call it. But what really differentiates those two fields is the possibility to do something different, to do something entirely new, rather than looking at what has worked out so far and what little risk can we take to advance the medium, but still stay close to what has been done in the past, which oftentimes, unfortunately, is the case with AAA.
Yeah, Chris, I think that's a good distinction that you point out there too. Like a simple example I always like to share with people, coming from my film background, is simply, technically, Steven Spielberg was an independent filmmaker, but it's a name that everybody recognizes, and by no stretch of the imagination would it be considered as an indie production as we see it. But to second another thing you said, is simply it's not necessarily so much about how many people are working there at a studio or something. It's also about simply having that flexibility and that to tell those unique stories that when other larger companies or investors and other things have a say in which, so those unique stories can come out. Because I also want to second what Jenny said, because that was the first thing that hit my mind, is the stories that the very distinct and interesting stories that come out of indie devs and indies as a whole is really great. But not just to piggyback off that, I would like to maybe go further too, but also, and I think the stories are a big component of this, but the experiences that they create. Like the example I gave with Spirit Fair was I think just a perfect one, because I honestly feel like I feel like I can get pretty immersed